every fiscal year that could result in some pretty deep cuts at all the schools where staffing is already kind of stretched and shared. And I really worry about the impact on all the students, both in our upper level schools as well as all of our elementary schools. I don't think it's good for students or good for staff to have one position shared among several schools and have some schools functioning in a situation where they're sharing administrators and nurses, and students don't have the full infrastructure available to them. And I think that's something the board needs to consider, and I think that's a reality that needs to be discussed openly among community members. So I think, I know that there's a lot of unrest in some of these communities where they feel their schools are vulnerable, but I really do hope that the board can take the initiative to really encourage folks to see the long game here, and realize and recognize, the impacts of kind of kicking the can down the road on not just the elementary school infrastructure, but particularly middle school and high school staffing and infrastructure, and really what that does for our learning environment in the broader scope, and what that means for the sort of livability of our broader community, and whether or not that is going to retain or attract families in the long run. So I guess I just want to say thank you for continuing these smaller group discussions where we can really dive into these particular issues. I get the sense that folks who are wanting to defend their schools, I totally understand and can appreciate that. I would probably be doing the same if my school were at risk of closure, but I hope that board leadership can really take the opportunity to have us look at this problem as a whole over the long run, and just want to encourage you to please continue prioritizing some of the other schools besides just the elementary schools. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mary Heather.
One more here, George Gross.
Hi, George.
George, are you there? Okay, we can see you. We can't hear you though, unfortunately. Not, can't hear you yet.
Check to see if your microphone is turned on your computer. You unmute him? It looks like he doesn't have it.
He's not muted, so I can't do anything on this.
There's a little button on your keyboard with a microphone on it. What's the keyboard?
George, do you want to call my cell? Okay, it's 54. Actually, I don't want to put that on. Let me guess, I've got your email. I'll send you my number, okay, George? Got your email from earlier. We'll figure this out.
As people come in, would you ask them to give us their full name and what town they're from? For the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
George, did you get my email? Okay.
Hello?
Hi, George.
Hello. Glad I could finally get aboard.
Yes, we are too.
Could you just state your full name and where you're from for the minutes?
Certainly. George Gross, Town of Shoreham Planning Commission. Okay. I'm going to walk away from my microphone. There seems to be some echoing. Myself, you may be aware, I prepared a cover letter and report that is addressed to the board and solicits the board to arrange a dialogue. And I was calling tonight to just introduce myself and offer you the opportunity to any questions you might have at this time. And just get you familiar with what I have.
Great, George, can you still hear us?
Yes, you're in the other room, but I can still hear you.
Great. So thank you. We did receive your communication today. I don't believe everyone on the board has had an opportunity to review it in its entirety, but we will be doing that shortly.
Okay, I'll look forward to that.
Thank you.
Look forward to talking to you on future occasions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Perhaps by carrier pigeon.
Can this night get any stranger? Technological challenges. I think we're all set.
We're all set.
We're all set.
Great. Well, thank you all again for bearing with us. At this time on the agenda, next up is to approve the minutes of the September 14th board meeting. Do I have a motion? And second by Mary. Any comments or discussion? All those in favor, aye. Raise your hand if you're on screen. Aye. Perfect. Any opposed? So moved. Next on the agenda is the ACSD bills. We will turn that over to Chip.
There was one set of bills which were read today by myself and Victoria. And for the general account, $413,511.52. And I motion that we pay the bills.
Second by Victoria. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye, raise your hand on it. Perfect. Any opposed? So moved. Next on the docket is report of the superintendent. First up, the ACSD school reentry. Peter.
Thank you. Okay. As you all saw, last Friday was a big day for us. We had been kind of watching the all of our different metrics that we were using to make a determination about bringing our elementary students back after lots of conversation with our regional group. And as you all recall, CVSA is the regional group, which is Addison County, Chittenden County, and Franklin County. It's probably 2/3 of the students in the state have been working together to problem solve all of the different issues that are coming up as we start school. So you all saw probably in the news last week, districts start to send out information to their communities about bringing students back. There's not one set way that people are doing this. So you can see that some are easing in starting on October 5th. Some are fully starting October 5th. It looks slightly differently, but I think for the most part, everybody in that region is moving to bring elementary students back. So it was exciting to share that news. There's also a lot of different moving parts in deciding to bring students back. One of the things that we wanted to make sure we had down was our health and safety protocols. We feel really good about how things are going. Students have adapted tremendously to wearing masks, to following protocols. Behavior has been incredible. It's been, I think it has really exceeded expectations just in terms of how quickly they're adapting. And as we all know, students tend to adapt more quickly than adults. And I think that's probably true. So part of what we're, as students come back on October 12th, we're having some of our students come back, and then pre-K2 and then 3-6 on the 19th. So we decided to stagger it to be able to kind of get into the routine in 1 week by bringing more students back. There will be some changes in our schools as students come back. So principals right now are working with Bruce McIntyre, our director of facilities, and other folks to make sure that our building spaces are appropriate. There are some changes that we're making in classrooms to create more space, where if you had a class, let's say of 17 and you had half your students coming, you may have had 9 students or something maximum. So we are kind of going through a process now of preparing for that. The guidance in step 3, the big news at the beginning of last week was the state moving from step 2 to step 3, which is the most lenient of all of our the 3 steps that the state has for education during the pandemic. The 3-foot rule, which is the kind of the elementary rule, is 3 feet if possible, meaning there is some space in there. If you can't maintain a perfect 3 feet all the time, do your best and absolutely prioritize masks. So there is some gray in the guidance. I think I've talked about this before. It's something that the field as a whole, I think, continues to work with health professionals, with the folks that wrote up the Healthy Start guidelines, which are the guidelines that direct what school looks like. I think we're probably going to see further iterations of that guidance as we proceed. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next month, some of what we're learning around COVID-19 and around implementation and being in the flow of school, I think we may see a third version of those guidelines. So that's something that we're still kind of talking about. Where those guidelines now are coming into focus is around secondary return and what that might look like. Currently, it's at the secondary level, it's 6 feet. So it gets much more challenging, which is one of the reasons why districts have prioritized beyond just the need for younger students to be in person. It's a lot harder to do remote with a kindergarten student than it is with an 11th grader. So that's one reason, but the other reason is the 6 feet versus the 3 feet. So that's something that we, as our elementary students are coming back, we're going to be taking the time to both assess their return and also be looking at secondary. Currently, I don't know of districts that are actively setting dates to bring secondary students back. I think it's something in talking to, I know in talking to Justin and others, there's some excitement around seeing students more. So that I think it's something that we're hoping to do, but also want to do it really thoughtfully and carefully. So that's kind of where we are with secondary right now. Staff are, as you know, really rising to the occasion. There is so much new that we're every day confronted with and learning. And they've been incredibly flexible in kind of figuring out what this looks like. We did a lot of planning in the summer to prepare, but it was planning, it wasn't implementation. And as we've implemented, we've learned things that we thought were great ideas in July, that when the rubber hits the road, you're like, yeah, that didn't quite work the way we wanted that to. So we continue to problem solve. We know that that's what this year is going to be. One of the things that we're looking at right now is our remote only students, the students and parents who have selected just remote for the year. That has been a challenge for teachers to try to juggle the remote students and the in-person. It's also during hybrid, it's a little bit different too. So we're working on that in earnest now, and hope to have more information coming over the next couple weeks as we make the transition to fully in person for our elementary students. Never a dull moment. Yeah.
Well, at first, I totally appreciate, I see in my own kids and in their friends, how well kids are doing. I absolutely agree with you that they're exceeding expectations in that regard. But I would also say that I think the teachers are exceeding expectations. Certainly parents I've spoken to and what I see with my own kids is really remarkable, the great stuff that's going on amidst the chaos. So I just wanted to make that point. A question about the secondary 6-foot rule. I know that it wasn't till late summer that the state changed the elementary to 3 feet.
Yeah.
Right? Is there any talk of, or have you heard anything about, would they do that at the secondary level?
I don't think they're going to change 6 feet to 3 feet just because the guidance, I mean, it's a long conversation probably.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of the research that's the 3-foot research. I'm not really clear on, but I know that the committee that was working on the guidelines did a lot of work with Pediatricians Association and talked about young students and COVID transmission, and change from 6 feet to 3 feet during the course of the development, when, you know, we all in March started hearing 6 feet, right? Like that was the mantra of 6 feet, 6 feet. So that kind of, as the guidelines came out, that's where the 3 feet piece shifted to. I haven't heard that, because they created an age range for that and talked about 3 feet tied to the research around younger students and transmission, and it not being as problematic. I don't think they're going to change the 6 feet. What they could do, I mean, if they kind of relaxed it in some ways, they may say, you know, kind of expound further on if possible. But I think the guidelines have been one of the most challenging things for superintendents, because there's both clarity around distance, and then it says if you can.
Right.
So it's hard to know. Plus, we're all in a society where we're hearing that 6 feet all the time. So that's I think the challenge that we're in, and you know, I think we're just going to have to continue to work with the state and with VDH and the Department of Health to kind of make the right decisions.
And actually, one more question. What's the process for if people have chosen to be wholly online and they, you know, minutes going in the school buildings and they want to change their mind? Is there a time period or?
But we had a time period that we extended to, I think it was the end of last week, like a week and 4 days ago. As we move to fully in person for elementary, a number of families have already stepped forward to say we want to return. We also think there may be some families who decide when we come fully in person, well, I liked the hybrid model, but I'm not sure. You know, we've set it up at a quarter break as an opportunity to change. What we don't want to have is, you know, it's really hard for our educators if people are moving back and forth all the time.
Right.
And some of that, you know, when we make our final changes to the remote approach that I mentioned earlier, that also may have implications for what it looks like to go back and forth too. So we'll certainly be, we've tried to be as flexible as we can.
Have you gotten a sense of how many students who you expected to enroll this year have not enrolled, either due to homeschooling or changing schools or something like that, but who you were expecting back?
I mean, I'm not sure who we were expecting back. I think some families who were enrolled, I guess who we were expecting back, decided to homeschool or to, you know, a number went to private schools. You know, both Bridge and Red Cedar have been offering 5 days a week. So that was, I think, a factor for some families. Yeah, so I think our numbers are actually, in terms of the number of remote only and the number who left, I believe are a bit lower than some of our counterparts. So we had more come back, which is good. And then I know the legislature is also working on a hold harmless.
Yes,
Bill.
we can talk about that on your poll.
Great. Throwing in a little pitch there, you know.
Mary, you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a question regarding, are all enrolled students going to be receiving the state, you know, money, or if they're partially remote, is that still going to be attached with?
Yeah, a student who is remote only is our student.
Okay.
Yeah, so we count them and they're an ACSD student, just like if they're in the classroom.
But
Yeah.
if they're designated homeschooling,
Then they're not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, yep.
Is there a, like, I know we're in phase 3, is there like a phase 3 plus?
This is it.
This is it.
This is it.
So any of the requirements that are in phase 3, those stay.
That's as far as we go.
That's as far as we go.
Yeah.
Until when?
Probably until a vaccine, or until transmission rates are so low that the governor pulls us off of these guidelines.
Because we're still in the state of emergency, correct?
That's right.
So it will probably be, those two things will probably be aligned then.
I would
So
think
the-
so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
super.
Yeah.
Any other comments or question on reentry? Great.
And I've got a great CO leadership team. I need to shout out to them too. They're working very hard.
Go team.
And the entire leadership team. And I mean, I shout out to everyone. This is really hard work, and it's, we all know the anxiety that everybody feels right now. And so I think people are helping each other and working through, and feel grateful to have such a great team.
Well, again, thank you all. for your contributions. Next up, you again,
Yeah, let me-
financial projection.
Brittany, are you
Yep, can you hear me?
on chapter? Yep.
You can.
All right, so I think the first item is the Q4 financial report. So seems like a long time ago, but this is our FY20 unaudited general fund activity. I say in the notes here that I'm still working on refining this report and making it like super usable, but also transparent. And so what I did is I just showed you the general fund. So that's really what affects our fund balance. We have grant funds, but those are cost neutral. So we only spend what we take in revenue. And those balances will be available in the audited report. But for ease of looking at this, I'm anticipating a net activity of about $928,000. It's a little less than last year, but more than some years. From March to June, we really didn't incur a lot for COVID expenses. In fact, we saved more than we incurred. That will not be the case from July on. So when you see the Q1 fiscal report, that'll be reflective of the first quarter of FY21. So I just thought I'd talk about some of the significant variances. So the first thing to say is that a $900,000 surplus can sound like a lot, but I always like to say, it's between 3 and 4% of our budget. If you remember, about 2 years ago, we only had $123,000 fund balance, which was very tight. And if you run a deficit, then you have to build that into your budget the following year and make that up in taxes, basically, or if you have reserve funds. So some of the notes to the financial statements. I say here that typically I don't expect significant adjustments between this report and the audit. In this case, I think that there will be some adjustments, mostly related to CRF, which is Coronavirus Relief Funds, and the ability to book some of those to FY20. So I'm still waiting for some confirmation, like an approved grant application, and we can book those revenues back. So that will make our fund balance better. I think it'll be around $40,000, but it could be as much as $80,000. So that will just help us. In terms of revenues, the variance in local revenues is related to tuition students and special education excess cost billings. And these numbers change throughout the year. Students move in and out of the district. Really the major change in revenue that you're going to see here is under state other. And this is largely a result of special education reimbursements. So when we get down to the expenditure side, you'll see that we had a lot less for special education expenditures than budgeted. And this can be for a variety of factors. It can be that some of the costs were not eligible for reimbursement. So a student on a 504 plan, for example, we're required to provide the services, but we don't get reimbursement for that. So that's coded as a regular general instruction expense. We also sometimes have students that we thought were going to be in an out-of-district placement, which can be very expensive, and that doesn't come to fruition. And then the transportation associated with that. And then, in some cases, the savings were related to COVID, so we didn't have to pay the full cost of some of our contracts. So that's reflected there. So you can generally assume that every special education dollar that we spend is reimbursed at around 50%. Sometimes it's more. So you can see that the change in revenue is really right about 50% of the expenditure. So that tracks. I note some other variances to talk about. In student instruction, that's largely related to school closure. We didn't have spring sports at all, so we didn't have to pay for coaching or transportation related to that. We did get a little bit of a break on our transportation contracts, so we did use the buses to deliver meals, but that was only one way, so we were able to recoup some costs there. And then just looking, doesn't look like there were other really significant variances, just sort of the normal course of business in any year. Does anybody have questions? I might have to have Peter repeat the questions to me.
Any questions for Brittany? Jen?
Did you already speak to what the special articles was and I missed it? I was trying to catch up. 123,000 year-to-date spending is for special articles and there's nothing.
Brittany, did you hear that?
No.
The 120 for special articles?
Oh, that's the so that was our use of fund balance, basically. So that was our surplus in FY18. And there was a special article that was voted to transfer that to the capital reserve fund. So that's what that is. That's our proposed use of fund balance. So that's why that's shown separately.
And you can see that on that chart on page 3. 123,801.
Yeah, it's a blue chart, 123,801.
And Brittany, just to clarify, the change in the special education formula / funding process that yielded a positive for us, is that a fundamental change that we will then see across future years, or how should we think about that?
It's just purely a reflection of estimating the costs related to students in October, a year and a half away. So kids we thought were going to be in, $100,000 placements didn't end up going. We saved some money on contracts. We didn't have transportation. So it's not a fundamental change. During budget season, we'll have to talk about changes in the funding formula for the future, but this isn't a reflection of that, really.
And those costs can go the opposite direction too. So.
Very quickly, yeah. I think it's probably the most volatile. I think Vicki would agree. It's one of the most volatile cost centers that we have.
Any other questions? Great. I think Brittany's up next. So.
The timeline?
Yeah, okay, so this is the timeline.
Maybe Chip wants to start.
Well, Victoria and I, as two members of the Finance Committee, were present at the Finance meeting the other day, and the same information that Brittany is presenting was presented to us. So I concurred with that. I think more the budget process issue that came up as to how the Finance Committee or the board would instruct the administration to develop the budget as we go forward. At times we have utilized a sort of percentage type number, and it was recommended to us, and I think it makes sense that if the board would, or I guess that we give them the instruction that as we're putting together the budget, and this is going to be obviously made up of some changes like sixth grade going to moms and whatever, which will change some of the numbers for sure, that we would have as a cutoff, so to speak, that as we approach the spending threshold or go over it, that be the number that we would work at, not a percentage above, because that doesn't, it's not going to give us any idea of where we are with the spending threshold. So we have generally, as a board in the past, I would expect we would do it again, say we do not want to go over the spending threshold, at least intentionally. And is that right, Victoria? I mean, I guess, so that would be what I would comment on relative to sort of the budget, not so much the timeline, but just the process as you start putting it all together. Is that correct, Brittany? Is that?
Brittany, did you hear Chip?
I heard bits and pieces of it, but what I heard accurately reflected our conversation. So this really is a similar timeline to what we've had in past years. I mean, I think we're starting at the leadership level to strategize a little bit earlier. There's a lot of moving parts. We've got the 6th grade move as well to work in and see how that's going to affect things. There are some positive things. We have some debt that is going to be retired for FY21, so that's a little bit of a help. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but similar, what we're presenting to you is very similar to what we presented in the past. It doesn't require any action, but it just kind of lets you know what to expect. So we'll start talking to you in October and November about the things that we're hearing at the state level, things that we know as sort of known fixed costs. Probably we'll, as Chip said, we'll do a roll-up budget. So we'll just kind of roll things forward, make the changes that we know are going to be changed, and then see where that lands us. And then if you remember from last year and the year before, we really don't start to get anything concrete from the state until mid-December. So that's when you'll see your first draft, because we won't be able to determine the full effect of the budget until that time. So that's when we get our equalized pupil number. That's when we get our yield estimates. And we also learn what the CLA is for each town, which all are determining factors in the tax rate. And then, we list here a proposed date for the board to vote on the budget, January 11th. We have a little bit of leeway there if we need to schedule a special meeting. And then we prepare and do a final update of the budget book in early February in preparation for the annual meeting. And then town meeting day is when the budget vote occurs.
And Brittany, for constituents thinking about, I'm hearing all of this stuff around the impact that COVID and where we are as a state's going to have on taxes, et cetera, et cetera. Would you say that it's fair on December 1st, when the tax commissioner recommends the yield rates, that we then start to have an understanding of what this picture is really going to look like?
So it'll be indicative. So if the yield has significantly decreased, then that tells us that all else equal, our tax rates will go up. If it's around the same or it goes up, then that's helpful for us. But really, we need our equalized pupil number, which we don't get until like mid to late December or May 2 years ago. And that's more of a determinant, because that's how our education spending per equalized pupil is calculated, and that's what determines if we're over the excess spending threshold. But the property yield will give us an indicator of the state of the ed fund and what the legislature anticipates will need to be made up in taxes.
And Peter, from a legislative perspective, is that a number that you would say to we would say to folks, look at this, this is a good indicator as to where we are as a state?
Yes. It's based on the best economists making their predictions as to what the revenue to the ed fund will be, as well as sort of a somewhat of an educated guess onto predicting what school districts will spend. It's the best we've done.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I've heard, and I think I heard this a couple of weeks ago, and Peter, you may have heard this too, that they didn't think the state would have really accurate information by December, so that the tax commissioner's letter this year will not be as indicative of where we'll be towards the end of the year as it normally is, because we're still going to be assessing shortfalls in revenue over the course of this current fiscal year. So I think this came from the Superintendents Association, we were warned as superintendents to quote unquote kind of be ready for, after we go through the budget process, getting further information. Who knows what that means, but that we're not going to have the kind of clarity we would like at budget season.
And just, I'm sorry, the season relates to March, meeting day vote, or are you talking about after?
I'm talking about the information we need to build the budget, which is December. So both the December 1st tax commissioner letter, the 15th equalized pupil will have. So that shouldn't change. But the projection of what the state coffers look like, and if there would be any impact on school districts, additional measures to suppress spending, which we were concerned about this year. And you remember the legislature went through a bunch of imaginations in the spring to look at reducing staff in districts, and they found out they couldn't. I think the Senate was looking at that, right?
Who knows what those folks do?
So there were a number of different ways they were trying to address shortfalls this year. It's hard to know what's coming, but from what I gathered, we're not going to have the information when we're building the budget. It probably will come afterwards. And you all remember we talked a lot about the clawback from 3 years ago, where they took the healthcare savings we got and pulled back a portion of it to the ed fund. So
I guess my question builds on that. Is there any indication or is there been any discussion around, if we get to sort of late in the game and, additional cuts, the state finds that additional cuts need to be made, what mechanism, how that would look, or what sort of mechanism they would use to do that?
So it's a great question. Really, it is still communities that decide how much to spend. And then the state becomes responsible for funding it.
But if there's nothing.
Well, the money is there because you take what everybody decides to spend and you fund it by raising property taxes. So I'm not sure that the power that exists is it is somewhat limited. People always talk about, well, with more kids we get more money. Well, get whatever money you want, whatever the money that the people vote for is the money you get. It's all a question of tax rates.
Mm-hmm.
So the mechanism is just simply, tax rates. Might we monkey with that system? Maybe. Yeah.
But theoretically then, if this yield information stinks, let's just, for kicks and giggles, say that it does,
Yeah.
and everyone goes back to the coffers with their normal plan, or maybe some increases, what then gets pushed down from a tax rate perspective could be extreme.
Yes, I think that is an accurate statement.
and the legislature can tinker with that all the way through May, right?
Tinker with what?
The yield rate. That yield rate isn't, they set it, an initial yield rate comes out December 1.
That's right.
But then later on, as the financial picture becomes clearer, they can
We tinker with it.
tinker with it and change that yield rate.
If
So that,
all of a sudden, the expected revenues are either way up or way down, you have to tinker with it.
So when our folks are voting in March on information that we present to them,
Yeah.
and then a yield is changed for new insights.
Yeah.
And they will then feel that burden when they receive their tax bill that year,
Yes.
which will be how many
all
months?
of our literature, which we'll be projecting the tax rate. This happens every year. We project.
Yeah, no,
But this year, I think is going to be a little bit different because there's,
There's so much uncertainty.
Yeah.
that, We could, Congress in January could appropriate another $1 trillion. We just don't know. We'd be having a completely different conversation.
right, which is one of the questions we got at the porch conversation. What will, there's a lot that could go so many different ways as well, because from a federal perspective, we just don't have strong indication as to how that's going to play out.
All of those funds, education's not getting the lion's share of the $1 trillion that the state got.
Well, that's true. And the other, am I talking over someone? I can't
No.
hear.
No.
Okay. The other thing to know is that all of the money that's come from the feds so far is not able to be used for revenue replacement. So they couldn't just fill the gap in the ed fund with that. Maybe that will change, but that's not.
Right, but January is a
A new day.
new day.
Yes. Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
I like your hope.
Hopefully.
Very optimistic.
Okay. Super fun.
Thank you.
Anything else, Brittany, on the timeline?
No, nothing else on the timeline.
Great, that's awesome. Great. Next up then, I think is us, correct?
Yep.
Report of the board. Committee updates. Chip, do you want to start us off with the finance committee?
I already did. You reviewed the timeline.
You reviewed the timeline.
We reviewed the timeline and we discussed what Brittany had
Great.
talked to us about, so I think I don't have anything else to report.
Policy, Mayor?
I believe I sent everybody, the response that I got from the Vermont State School Board regarding the electronic communications policy that we discussed last week. And in essence, we really can't change it. It's as is. And any changes we want to make, we have to petition with the legislature to make a change because it's in statute. So it's recommended that we will present it to the board in October for our vote.
Okay.
And we're also looking at the Title IX, which is a new policy that's coming down for us to look at. So we'll have some information on that.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Mayor.
Does that policy relate to the federal changes?
Yes, it does, yeah.
Amy?
So communications and engagement, we've had 3 porch conversations so far, is that right? And you guys need to share how those have gone, but certainly in terms of attendance, you know, last night's was full. We've got 2 this week, in another one in Weybridge on Wednesday, and then in Ripton on Thursday, and then a couple others that are in the hopper, and a couple scheduled for mid-October, 14th and 15th. Anyway, so that's all moving along. And I just need to say thank you to Mary and Victoria, because and Peter, because that's a toll to do 2 or so of those a week for the next, you know, for the 6 weeks or whatever. That's a heavy load. So thank you. In terms of e-chats, tomorrow, Vicki and Caitlin are going to each have their little e-chat recorded. So we hope to get them all on the website by the end of the week. And we're putting together a board newsletter that'll have links to all of these things in them that'll go out later this week. If we get it together enough, it'll be later this week. So we will make sure that it does not conflict with Friday's, with Peter's report on Friday, but ASAP anyway. And I think that's mostly it. Website conversation is ongoing.
Great. And Victoria, do you want
Anything, team, committee members?
to comment, Victoria, on the porch conversations at all?
Yeah, I think that the porch conversations have been great. We've been in Middlebury and Cornwall and Weybridge last night. And as Amy said, we had a good turnout. I'd say in general, people have been very understanding of the terrible situation that the district is in, and appreciative of the work that's going on. But also, you know, very open about their, you know, disappointment in certain schools closing. And then others are, you know, ready to just kind of know the plan and let's start looking forward. And
No, I think it's, for me, it's been great to get an understanding from folks where there's clearly been miscommunication. There have been questions that they've asked or things that they've presented as their understanding, and it's clearly like we're operating in a context that does not have shared language yet, which is always really hard to operate in that context. And so I think that has provided us with an opportunity to have a dialogue face to face and clear up some of that, which I think is super beneficial. And we have, I think at every one at this point, in all the towns so far, each porch conversation has had a mixture. So there has not, of the 3 that we've done so far, not one of them have been all from one community, which I know we were worried about, but I think the families, the host families have done an amazing job of reaching out to a cross section and getting folks there that are not just from a single perspective, which has really helped in those conversations as well. They've not been easy. They have not been easy. This is, as we all know, this is at the core of so many of these folks that they're sitting there, many with their kids there, and talking about something that is central to who they are, and trying to have an understanding of why are you taking it away. And that's a really hard, it's a hard conversation, and it's understandably so. But they're important, and we just are super appreciative of Amy and the team and the families who are willing to pull this all together. And Peter was at one last night. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, but I think you both have articulated it well. I think it's it is an opportunity in a conversational style that we don't normally get to engender with the community. I mean, board meetings are a formal meeting of the board. So I think it is providing an opportunity to really kind of hear and also share kind of where the board is and where the district is, and provide history. And I think as connected as we feel like we are in the modern era with social media and everything else, we're also I think we're more scattered in some ways and more disconnected. So that's kind of what I felt last night was connection. And I think as we build that foundation of this is us, this isn't groups or different people, but it's an us, I think it really helps us to tackle some of the challenges that we see ahead, and we can carry Peter's attitude of hope.
I want to say, having been the point person at many of these conversations, even before we became a unified district, I know the level of stress the 2 of you are carrying doing these. And so very much appreciate. I know it can be incredibly frustrating as you learn that despite all of our efforts, people have us someplace where we're not even there yet. And it's very hard to break that. So I'm very appreciative of what you're doing, and I know how hard it is. But boy, is it important.
Any other questions on that? Yeah.
So overall, so far from the porch conversations you've had, do you feel like after at the end of the conversations, folks have a better understanding of the whole picture, or are they still?
I think there's been opportunities to provide new information. Do I think that folks, someone who's come in with a perspective or a wish for something, do I feel as if we, through a porch conversation, have done a 180 and now there's a complete new wish or new understanding? I don't think that. But I do think it has given opportunities for folks to take a moment to reflect on their own ideas and their own reflections. Especially the best part of the conversations, honestly, have been when community members from different towns have been going back and forth. Those have really been, I think, healthy and important dialogues. And like anything else, you know, I know when I'm in a discussion / argument or debate and you're in the middle of it, right? Like you're not really reflecting on it 100%. And then I go back and a week later, I'm still thinking about it. And maybe something has changed at that point because it takes time to go through that process mentally. But I think there have been moments of insight and there have certainly been moments of frustration. Any other questions on them? Well, we will be in a town near you, so feel free to join us.
What other towns are signed up? We have, are all of our towns covered? Let me ask that question.
Amy, do we?
I don't think we have a.
Do we currently have every town covered for at least one?
Yeah, Bridport's getting scheduled. Actually, that's not true. What Salisbury, we don't have any hosts yet, in-person hosts. So
one.
I take.
But Charm and Bridport will
Yep.
have.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, we're at the town.
Yep.
I think it's Weybridge, Ripton this week.
Correct. Weybridge and Ripton this week, the second Middlebury and the second Ripton the week of the 14th. Bridport is potentially the 7th or the week of, anyway, but I needed confirmation from you guys. And then there is, and Shoreham is later in October, another call later in October. We do have a second host for Shoreham and Bridport, but I haven't heard back from them on alternate dates. And then Salisbury is the one where we haven't had anyone offer in person.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so if that's a priority, if you want to, you know, be able to have something in every town,
Definitely.
I can try to follow up one-on-one with them.
That would be awesome, Jen.
Okay. And
Right.
what's the preferred time frame to have that, you know, to slot that one in? Is there, you have like certain dates, or should I just?
We'll get Amy to send you some options.
Amy's got a giant spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
To get them
Yep.
Yeah.
would probably be helpful.
That would be great.
All right.
Great.
Probably also important to remind ourselves, if you've been reading the Addison Independent, we are not alone in this.
Yeah.
You know, big article about Mount Abe and their study, big article about Addison Northwest and their study. They're facing the same headwinds.
Yep.
Jen, to add to that, in Shoreham, I said they're doing it at the town green, so if someone wants to be a host, it doesn't necessarily have to be at their home. They could have it, you know, at the school, outside, or somewhere.
The second Ripton one is also, it's at the community house. Exactly.
Yeah.
I can ask Waterhouses do it, and I just have to put somebody else's name as the host, because you want me to be the host, right?
Whatever, I just, so you know, it doesn't have to, you know,
Yeah. If
I
somebody
don't want that to be a barrier.
Waterhouse has some benches, and they're on it there.
Yeah.
I don't think you can have it at school, right?
No.
Right, we can
usually
have it in
have our
school.
friends up
Oh,
in
right, we can have it.
Yeah. Okay, good enough, thank you.
All right. Great. Negotiations.
And I would say at that time, well, go ahead. All I was going to say is at that time we would assess and, you know, see how many people participated and, you know, maybe we would do more. I'm saying that with a big question mark to Mary and Victoria, but, you know, I think, and we know we're going to do some on Zoom too. So, but we hope to do as many in person first. Okay, I'm done. Thanks.
Great job. Peter, negotiations?
I'll hold off to item number 6.
Perfect. And then facilities. Victoria.
So we had a meeting last week. The days feel long, I can't even remember what it was, but anyway, it was on Wednesday, and it was great. It was, it felt like after so much time and energy and scrutiny spent on the elementary school study that it was a moment to sort of get a little bit to the fun part, or to the part where we could really imagine like what might these schools look like. Vicki and Caitlin presented their models with sort of staffing both for general ed and special services, and what that might look like in a 3 and 4 school model. And so that was great. I would recommend to all of you, the links are on, I think it was quite a long meeting, so I think it's in 2 links, are on the website now, and they're absolutely worth going to see at least the presentation piece of it, because it felt like to me like this is what we, sort of a culmination of what we've been talking about, and certainly it's somewhat of a culmination for what's now been over a year, 2 years, 3 years, 3 years worth of work. So it definitely is, your time will be worth it. We talked about the calendar and sort of filled in the details, including the court conversations and community input, and you know what needs to happen in order for a rough draft to be done by the 1st of the year, and whether or not we'll be able to get the final one done by town meeting day. I think we feel comfortable with that schedule, and moving forward with that.
And just, I think to clarify, because we talked about it during the Facilities Master Plan Committee meeting, and then there was a question of it at the porch conversation last night as well. The correlation between the report being ready for town meeting day should not be interpreted then that report is being voted on at town meeting day, because I think some folks
it would be
are
better.
hearing those two things together.
It would be better
So we
just to
should
say
March.
February or March, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But that there is, you know, people give voice to their vote, and the way they give voice with their vote in this regard is by voting on the school budget. And that does happen at town meeting day.
So we have received a petition from one of the smaller towns, and we have asked for legal counsel. So we'll be reporting out on that next meeting. Just waiting to get that back. And
The committee talked about 3 school, 4 school, and
oh, right. So what part of what we had asked Vicki and Caitlin to do was to look at both 3 and 4 school model and see what they felt best would serve the needs of all kids. And they both came down on the side of the 3 school model because it didn't require splitting up specialists into 4 schools, and just a few more students when you reach kind of the 120 person school. It's much easier to sort of staff it with a whole person, and then you drop down just even to the 100, and it's harder to rationalize putting a whole person there. And so the committee agreed that we should continue our focus on the 3 school model. The next information that is going to be very pertinent to moving forward will be sort of the boundaries and whether or not we can really deliver the vision by redrawing the boundaries and what those school communities will look like. So that, I think, will be some of the more intense focus over the next month or so.
And how does that happen?
so we have a transportation consultant who did the initial mock-up. They have software, you can't do it by hand. And we were finally able to get a map that shows it's a heat density for population of where students live. So you can, you know, we talked about how the boundaries would be drawn, as in any district, based on student population. So it'd be able to see there are this many students in this area, there are this many students in this area, and then it's starting to put that information into the software to determine, you know, what the routes are. You also have to have some local knowledge. You know, people are talking about Swamp Road and the challenges of Swamp Road in certain times of year. So,
And how is that, are those variables weighted for other characteristics? So when we're saying that we want to ensure that this construct is created that is representative of an appropriate socioeconomic diversity at that population level, that might not necessarily be akin to just a variable of distance between point A and point B.
yeah, I'm not sure if the program itself can do that. I would assume that we could look at a map and there would be different options in terms of, you know, like you could come up with a number of different ways to redistrict the district, right? Like, or you could focus like this, or you could focus in a different area and create three circles. It's kind of like moving 3 circles around when you think about it. But they're not perfectly round, right? Like you could have a long sliver, but it just depends on the population. So we'll be looking at that, and you know, I think this came up last night in the porch conversation. You know, I think a lot of people want to know, well, what does this mean for me, for where I live, and you know, it's too early because there's even no. First of all, we're looking kind of theoretically and hypothetically right now. We don't have a timeline, and we don't also, we would want to make that decision closest to when we would start that new model of instruction to know if population has shifted. It wouldn't make sense to make that decision, present that now as a final.
No, but we would have to be able to present that the solution is possible with current
Exactly.
data
Totally.
to get that
Totally.
diverse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chip?
And what about the idea of choice? When does
So that
come
came
into
up.
this picture?
Yeah.
If we're organizing districts, so to speak, small groups, and these circles are floating around a little bit, we have never really addressed that idea of choice. If you were on the borderline of somewhere, or you were, I don't know, I mean, there's variables as to why someone is going to choose differently than where they're living.
Right, I mean,
If they're in that circle, absolutely.
I think it makes sense, to offer choice. I think at this point, I can't say definitively. I think we need, discussion with administration, and those who know better than I about the ramifications of school choice, to really dive into, like, what does that actually mean and what would it look like?
One of the, and this is a real tough one, because we're trying to address a balancing of social economic. All right, the choice issues may come up because people are trying to avoid the social, okay? So that this is going to be very hard juggling, I would say, to be able to get it the way we would envision it perfectly.
Peter?
And I assume a lot of these topics are going to come back to us to debate through, right?
I hope so.
And so I think it would be good for whoever, if you can provide the board with kind of like, okay, you know, this is when this is going to come to the board,
Yeah,
this is when this is going to come to the board. And this is where the initial sort of committee work is going to take place.
And so maybe from a facilities master plan perspective, as well as just these general topics that have to be discussed before we get to the end, we embed them into the timeline so that we understand, great, here's when we need to be ready to here's where we need to be ready to talk about school choice, or here's when we need to be ready to see a draft example of how this from a transportation perspective could actually work.
But it's actually, you know, it's almost easier to talk about bricks and mortar.
Totally.
Totally easier, that's why I brought it up. I don't have a feeling on it, but I just think, wow, this is.
It's a lot.
Really challenging.
It's a lot. A lot. Jen?
And school choice is on the facilities master plan, we have a placeholder for it, and we decided to table it like a year ago until we went through the elementary study. So it's probably something, it could be talked about and discussed at any point. But I think we had tabled it to focus on the elementary school study, and then we were going to come back to it. So I know I've got a page in the draft that we started a year and a half ago with some of the initial work and the 6th grade work that we did. And there we have a placeholder for that.
Great. Jen?
Two questions about sort of the transportation issue-ish. So one, on the location piece, is it their mailing address, or do you know if it's their physical pickup address? I know when I was looking at data last year, that was a little tricky. It looked like a bunch of people lived at the post office in Richmond, for example.
Yeah, I don't. Brittany, do you know the answer to that question? Does the heat map for student resident location on that I can't remember what it's called. It's not GIS, but
Yes, it is.
oh, good. Okay, it's GIS. Does that have that's their actual location, right? Not their mailing address? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think for the initial, just kind of making the rough circles, it might not matter, but if you're looking at, is this gonna be an hour bus ride? It will be a big difference, because you're not picking all those kids up at the post office, you're driving up all those mountain roads. For one, and then second, it's related, you're looking at current student data, I'm imagining, for the initial, are you also looking at, say this is gonna happen in 2 years? Are you looking at projected new incoming students in 2 years, and then eliminating the students who will be graduating out in 2 years to think about, are the locations roughly the same? Are the numbers of students living roughly in those areas going to be comparable to the current numbers, or do you need your shift?
I think for the first.
I was just going to say about the GIS map, I think it is their physical location, or else we would have had like a bunch of people at the Middlebury post office, and we didn't have that, so.
I think for the initial run, because if we project forward, we can project the students that are leaving, but we can't project who's coming. So.
Your birth data from past, and just like the data you're using.
Yeah. I'm not sure how significant that will be for an initial, is it possible? But I think that would be, as we, depending on kind of where we go, just to be kind of aware of that. And if we can, we'll talk to our consultant, and if we can work in any of that into the initial outlook, we'll do that for sure.
Yeah, I think that might answer some of the concern that maybe people have about people moving in and higher birth rates in certain communities, and will there physically be enough room in these schools if we're now saying that this kind of bubble goes there?
Yeah.
If we're using the current numbers, that's one thing, but we also, once we get down to that nitty-gritty, like, is this gonna work beyond the next 2 to 5 years, we should probably look at real, current, and projected numbers.
Really? Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? Yes, Lorraine.
I'm still a little bit confused as to the 3 and 4 model options. I know I listened to the meeting the other night, and I know there's been it seems like the 3 school model seems to be the preference. So I'm wondering, given, for example, the information we received today from Shoreham, is some of that information at least new to the facilities committee? I mean, at least it was new to me, but I don't know what the facilities committee has received from schools. Would that kind of information make a difference at all as far as 3 and 4 model schools, which I mean, I personally found it interesting. So I'm just, and I have been, I don't have an issue necessarily with the 3 school model, but I did find some of that information very intriguing. I do have some concerns about, I know we haven't decided for sure what schools are going to go where, but I know there's been discussion. And I do have some concerns about the free school model and making sure there's socioeconomic equity as well as other kinds of equity in the three school model and whether that can be accomplished. So I'm just wondering about whether that Shoreham information is going to be taken up by the facilities committee. If there's going to be discussion about it. I know tonight you said that not everybody probably had a chance to read it, which I'm sure is true. We didn't get it till this morning. I did look at it. I did read it. And as I said, I found it very interesting. So I'm just wondering if there are thoughts from the facilities committee, if you can enlighten me a little bit as to how much of that you were aware of in the past and whether that might change anybody's thoughts.
Yeah, no, good question. I was unable to get beyond page 4 today, so I don't feel that I have, I don't know all that's within it, so I can't really speak to how much I think it's going to impact. Certainly, I'm going to read it, and I would expect the rest of the committee to read it as well, and we will, tackle the questions within, in the next week or so. But I can't speak specifically because I haven't read the.
Okay.
But it's important to remind ourselves of the process here. Facilities committee is going to bring forward a recommendation. It's the board that's going to have to make the decision.
Right. No, I understand that, but I know that Caitlin and Vicky, there was a lot of discussion at that last meeting about the three school model seeming to be the preferable model. And again, I don't necessarily have an issue with the three school model, providing it gives us what we need for all of our students. And I do have some concerns at this point as to whether or not the three school model will accomplish that. So I just didn't know how much, if any of the information provided in that letter or email from Shoreham today had already been looked at by the facilities committee, because I haven't made all of the facility committee's meetings. So I have no idea how much of that the offer was new to them, how much they had already, looked at the things in the email. So yeah, I agree. Ultimately, it will be a board decision, but I always hope that the committee who is doing the work is coming back with, a sound recommendation. So unless I hear, I wouldn't go against the committee's recommendation necessarily. I would assume it's well-founded, but I just want to make sure we are looking at everything. And you're right, it is ultimately the board's decision.
Yeah, no, Lorraine, I'm with you. I think, I think right now, after Vicki and Caitlin's presentation, I feel very comfortable that we can deliver services in a three school model. I think you're right that that doesn't mean that we're done. I think we still need to look into where we're going to draw students from to make sure that we can deliver on what the vision is and on what we're promising to do in these schools. So, the conversation is not over. And more work still needs to be done, definitely.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm glad to hear.
So Lorraine, one thing just to share about I just took a brief look at what they shared. What Vicki and Caitlin shared last week in the meeting was about the educational model, not about the condition of the building or the location. And I believe, I didn't look in depth, as I mentioned, I took a quick glance today, and we'll spend time with it later this week. I think a big part of it would more be going back to the three legs of the stool metaphor, would be on the actual facilities and the vision for the selection of buildings and potentially some of it. Do we need 3 or 4 schools from a facilities perspective? What from the educational model perspective, that's where I think Vicki and Caitlin articulated the 3 school model was a better fit in terms of looking at staffing and services and resources to be able to sustain that. So that was just the I think part of the difference.
And I think, Lorraine, to your point, there's the facilities component of it, there's the educational component that was shared, but then there's the execution of the overall vision. And that execution is very much dependent upon logistics. And we got to make sure that there are logistical possibilities to yield the vision that we're looking for from a facilities and educational perspective. And I think some of what was included in that document that we received, and we've been talking about throughout, has been, are those logistical supports accurately being reviewed or accurately being determined, and can we deliver?
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions on that? Super. Next up online is it.
I didn't get it down. Could you just repeat the discussion?
You're here all week, aren't you, Peter? Next on the agenda is the ACSD board implicit bias training.
So that's mine. So, you know, I was thinking about the work that we're doing as a district, you know, both on equity, anti-racism, and I thought, you know, as a group, and I include myself in kind of this us, I thought it would be helpful for the board in leading this work to look into some kind of training and, you know, like basically, you know, there are lots of different options and opportunities that we would have. There's lots of things that are both virtual. We could probably find some things in person, but we've never done anything formally together. And I think it would be really helpful for us in leading the vision, in just adopting the new policy on equity, in being, you know, the visionaries for the district to really be thoughtful about who we are and what we know, and understanding our own implicit bias and leading from a place of strength. So I put that on there just to kind of to bring that forward, to suggest that maybe that would be an opportunity for us.
I would agree. I think that that's a great opportunity. You know, if we expect others, including all staff and all the way down to our youngest students, to embrace this sort of thing, it's got to start.
Peter?
I've been through what would probably be considered by experts mediocre implicit bias training. Still found it very powerful, very worthwhile.
So we would like the mediocre training.
You know, I think some of us haven't ever said it. Consider ourselves not biased, but of course we are. So I think it's really important to have some sort of concrete academic view of this in a way that may open up some parts of our own thinking. I don't know what you're talking about. Are we talking about a day? Are we talking about multiple days? I guess I don't know exactly.
So I mean, I think, like I said, there are lots of different directions we could go. I can come back with some options.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, I like that actually.
Okay, great.
Mayor?
My thought is it's so multifactorial. I mean, there's so many different parts to this. It's not just a racial, it's not just socioeconomic, there's so many different parts. So I don't think it can be done in an hour or 2 hours. I think it's gonna take some reflection on our part, some reading ahead of time, some thought process. So I agree, I think we need plenty of time to really get into it.
Great.
We'll look for some
Thank you.
options and recommendations, and then we can go from there.
Great.
Super. The VSBA regional meeting discussion. Honestly, I have no idea why that's on the agenda.
You
Did this
just
work,
discussed, you
everyone?
just discussed it.
Do we wanted to attend, or what is, what?
So the regional meeting, so there's a history to this. Peter, do you want to give the regional history?
Well, you know, many of us have attended the regional meeting, was held for some time at Otter Valley. Last year it was at MUHS. You know, I think if you can go, it's good to go to. It gives you a sense of what the VSBA's priorities are. It's a good way to interact with our regional representatives on the VSBA board, who we get these emails from.
Is it in person this year?
It's virtual.
It's virtual. So it's in October. So
It's on October 8th at 5 o'clock.
so I would just encourage anybody who can to participate. And it's good to have a showing from our.
And it's just, I think it's just the three, I think it's just the three, it's 4 districts, I believe. They include Rutland Northeast, yeah. Actually, they might not now though, because they've now broken it off into just Addison and just Rutland. I think they're now with Rutland. So this is smaller. We had the smaller regional meeting last year. It was here at the library. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember.
Can't remember who went.
So if we don't
So
show,
is there like a, sorry, is there a,
Agenda?
like you have to RSVP and?
You sign up. Yeah, you're supposed to sign up.
For certain lectures or?
No, you just sign up. It's just a 5 to 7 meeting. They'll talk about what's the work of the VSBA. They'll talk about resources available to board members. They'll talk about maybe some information related to VisBid or VHI or other.
That's Thursday, the 8th,
Yep.
5 to 7.
Yeah. And you should have received an email about it
We may have.
somewhere.
Kevin Hansen.
Betty,
Yeah, I see the 29th.
29th of what?
October.
Is that regional?
Let me look.
Well, that's the business meeting.
I don't have anything. That's something different. Yeah.
all right, so we'll make sure though that we have, I mean, if there's only 3 districts, we need.
We should have a few people go.
people.
Yeah.
Well, last year.
Okay.
Somebody else gets to go.
And if you remember last year, had we not shown up, nobody would have been there.
Really?
Yeah.
Although it is virtual, so there's a little bit.
The next thing where we're actually supposed to vote, so should somebody, then we have to kind of assign a proxy, because I think in the past, it's been you, Peter, right?
That's
Well,
a
so
different.
first of all, we gotta discuss the proposed resolutions. I couldn't actually.
Right, the next thing. I didn't know if that relates to the conversation
Yeah, I
of somebody
couldn't
having to go.
I couldn't, but I think that,
They're on
you
your
can learn
email
about the
too.
resolutions at the regional meeting.
Right, but do we vote on those at the meeting?
So the process they use is they do the regional meetings to set up this other meeting. So they'll talk about the resolutions and they'll share kind of why we think it's important and what we're doing. And you also did get an email, I think 2 weeks ago, with the proposed resolutions and the VSBA thumbs up, thumbs down on them.
I see, it's in the link, you have to like click on the link and then click on another link.
Yeah.
And these resolutions are voted on at the VSBA meeting by those who attend.
And normally that's a Lake Maury in person. Peter and I have gone together. It's a superintendent board chair thing.
So I vote for us at that. But, you know, and to be clear, a very small percentage of school boards are actually at the annual meeting voting on resolutions.
Most do the proxy, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So as a matter of action, do we have to do anything for these proposed resolutions?
No.
No. Okay, great.
But we do have, this is an action item.
Okay. And that is for the proxy votes.
Yes.
And we have to identify either a proxy or giving our proxy to,
Someone on the board who will vote on the board's behalf at
or
these meetings.
do you give it, can you also give it to these?
Or you give it, the proxy is yeah, there are two, well, they call this a proxy when you give it to the VSBA.
Yep.
And it's by majority of the VSBA, or we can assign a certificate of authority for one
For one
person
person.
here
What have we done
to
in the
attend.
past?
We've always done the proxy.
I move that we behind this annual meeting votes, that we assign proxy or vote by proxy, not vote, but
Appoint the VSBA.
use the proxy system. to participate.
Do we have a second? Second. Any discussion or comments? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Anybody opposed?
Anybody know?
How are we doing on the phone?
So just so people understand, this is the nonprofit organization that handles essentially all of the insurance for school districts. The health insurance, they run that, and casualty and property and all of that through the insurance trust. This VHI has their own board of directors and very, very capable paid staff. So the board, what we're essentially saying is we trust the board of directors to do what they're doing.
And that's usually what we say.
Yeah.
Perfect. How do we pay them?
Yeah, we pay premium.
Yeah.
We're self-insured.
Right, if you need.
We pay dues to the VSBA. Yeah.
Great, so I can sign this?
Yep.
Super. Next action, ratify the ESP master agreement.
All right, so it's there, you don't need to necessarily read it. This past week, Lorraine attended just a quick meeting to sort out some details, got sorted out. So here's the agreement. Ultimately it was a 2.5% increase in salaries on average, and then $15,000 put towards bringing people sort of together and on the same salary schedule. We're still in the process of incorporating all of the different pay scales that were out there. And I would move that we go ahead and ratify the ESP master agreement.
Do we have a second?
I want to write this stuff down.
Do we have a second?
Is this
Any
another
questions?
joke or is this?
Questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Show of hands. Any nays?
And next up, probably our next meeting will be the teaching staff contract.
Great. So approved. Great, and then under other, any other? Yes.
I'd be happy to just let folks know kind of what's affecting schools with the legislature having just wrapped up Friday for the 2-year biennium. Everything starts with a clean slate in January. So one of the provisions, there's a lot of concern across the state that because of the number of children who would normally enroll this year, but have chosen to homeschool or to go to a 5-day-a-week in-person option or something, that we sort of we count kids one day in October, and that will not give an accurate representation of really what enrollment will be next year or what it should be in a non-COVID situation this year. And as you take that count and then it goes into average daily membership, that's the number that you use, and then that's used to come up with your equalized pupils on a rolling 2-year average. So it can have an impact if the numbers are significant, especially if they're sort of clustered in various areas. So anyway, we built into the budget a hold harmless that says that no school district will drop below their 2019-2020 school year average daily membership. So we hear a lot about people moving in and numbers going up, like way down south in Winhall is kind of the one that was in the New York Times, if everybody saw it. But really, the bigger concern for people has been actually an actual drop due to homeschooling and all that. Good question.
But it can go up.
Yes, it can. It just can't go below what it is now.
Okay.
The December 1st letter that we keep talking about, we directed the tax commissioner who put that together to not take into account deficits and the need to fill reserves in FY21, because we're going to do it, but legally the letter has to reflect not doing it. So anyway, it's just to kind of keep that on a more even keel, so that it's showing reality, not, you know, there's a lot of weird timing. The legislature was very clear that the tax rates that were part of the yield pre-COVID are the tax rates that we're going to have for FY21 through borrowing, use of other funds and whatnot. And that won't really be part of that wouldn't be part of the letter normally. It would be looking at the actual $60 million deficit, having to refill reserves and whatnot. And we just sort of ordered them to take into account the actions that the legislature took to keep the ed fund whole for FY21.
So net in FY21, there will be no budgetary impact or tax impact due to COVID spend.
Yeah, lack of COVID revenue. We literally kicked the can down the road because we couldn't ask people to deal with those dramatic changes.
And is there any thinking from an economic perspective then what that delay in accountability almost, and I mean that you know, but delay in accountability will that cause a more significant impact in the following year? Or?
No, but we maybe the following 5 years, because it probably, some of filling that hole will be borrowing.
Okay.
With maybe a 5-year payback, which is a lot less of an impact than, you know, but so to a certain extent, yes. For the most part, no. And it's going to be painful enough as it is.
And have they made any statement that they're not going to do the same thing next year?
No, because they're you know, as of Friday, the legislature's done. January starts with a new legislature. The slate is wiped clean. So no, we can't.
So we have no, right, okay.
We talked about, one of the things that we were dealing with was when school buses were driving around delivering meals, dumbest idea ever, rather than students. There was concern that would not be reimbursed through the transportation money that schools get. We made it clear that will be reimbursed as if there were students on the bus. It only qualifies if you're transporting students, not if you're transporting meals. So we made it clear that will be covered. Mostly we dealt with coronavirus relief fund dollars and how to appropriate that to schools. So we spent a lot of time learning what we thought the added costs were going to be, and making sure there was enough money there to cover it, hopefully. So that's pretty much how we spent the last month session that we did. This is the session that we did. And the hope is and the expectation is that schools will not have to endure added costs due to COVID that won't be covered by CRF funds. And if there isn't enough money, we'll prorate and figure out a way to do it equitably.
Okay.
So we also talked about the CRF. Brittany had attended a VASBO meeting last week, I think it was, in kind of talking about coding, and it's something that the finance committee talked about in terms of how we approach it, because it sounds like there are different approaches you can take to receiving money back. Brittany, do you have anything you want to share regarding that? That would be helpful.
How into it do you want me to get?
It's getting late, so probably not too, just
Well,
an
I will-
overview, quick,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I will tell you that we did receive word today that the FEMA funds are not on the table for school districts. The federal government, they originally thought maybe we could get some FEMA money and that would stretch the other sources of funds. That's not coming. But essentially, part of the way that there's that the deficit in the ed fund is proposed to be reduced is through school districts submitting for CRF reimbursement for repurposed costs. So an example of that could be, we were always going to pay teachers, but they spent 10% of their time, I'm making this up, 10% of their time planning for remote learning. So we would say, give me, $300,000 for teacher prep time of CRF money, and they would give us that money, and then they would withhold that money from our ed fund payments. So that's the main thing that we're working on as business managers, is like, well, what's reasonable, what makes sense, and what's going to put us not at risk, as a district, because we were concerned that we would use up all our money, all our allocated funds on unbudgeted costs and then not get, on repurposed costs, and then not get what we needed for unbudgeted costs.
Yeah, I think that's probably a real concern. I mean, either way, it's all money that's been spent that has to be paid for. So I don't have anything to add.
Yeah.
There's another pot of money out there, called ESSER funds, it's fairly significant, and will also play into this with a lot fewer restrictions and a lot longer timeline to figure out how to spend.
And
Well,
we
it's
are,
just that I'm uplifted when I hear Peter talk, and then I hear Brittany talk, and I have to tell you, wah wah. So I'm not quite sure how to think about
They're
good or
both,
bad.
they're
they're
both,
both true.
they're both true,
Yeah.
and they're both ways of spending money that didn't exist in a way that, to the greatest extent possible, that protects taxpayers. When we talk about repurposing funds, that money would then be used to offset the deficit in the education fund. Which we all have to pay for. But if that repurposing exceeds or dips into the money that we really need to pay for PPE and all this other stuff, it'll be re-examined.
Well, and I think there's a separation between the legislature and the ground in terms of there's some intermediaries in between, and I think some vagary on this that we're working through at the state level for sure. I mean, I will say that one of the things that we're doing is we in a normal year, we are like anything that comes across our plate that looks like an expense we haven't budgeted, we push away. And this year we have a very different approach because we're in a pandemic and we're having to provide things. So we are extending. We don't know how far that extension will be reimbursed. So it's possible that we'll run a deficit this year. And we wouldn't be surprised if we did, partly because we don't know how that's all going to play out, how it's going to shake out. And we do want to prioritize students, safety, getting school running, all of those things.
Basically, if we can't repurpose a bunch of this money and still cover the unexpected costs, then the repurposed money part will go away.
You mean the school,
Can I?
We just run a deficit in the end fund.
Brittany's got something.
Brittany, what?
Sorry, it's hard for me to tell if I'm interrupting someone, so I'm just trying to go back.
Great.
But the other important thing to know is that CRF funds can only cover expenditures incurred through December 31st. ESSER funds, which is the pot that Peter was talking about that's much less restrictive, can go beyond that. And we have our allocation of ESSER funds. I have to write the grant still. most business managers I know are waiting to see how the dust settles with the CRF funds. But it's like $450,000 that we'll have access to. So that's really encouraging. I also am encouraged to hear about the things going on at the, at the legislature. I'm just not that fun, Mary, I guess. I always.
I didn't. I'm just worried. No. My only point was if you look worried, then I'm going to worry.
Yeah, I'm worried.
If he looks worried, then I'm going to worry. So I want to know whose face I should be looking at right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I'm worried because, but that's my job, is to think about the worst case scenarios and plan for that.
Great. We are glad you're doing that. Any other comments and other? Great. You know what time it is. Anyone want to move to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
So moved. 9 o'clock. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.